Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni viewer, and I'm here to talk about a show this time around. I recently finished watching House of David, and I actually really liked it. But I see that there's kind of a mixed response to it, so I wanted to throw my hat in the ring and share why I think it's actually a good show. First of all, I think it is just on a technical level very, very well done. I have occasionally seen reviews saying that the show looks cheap, and I have to ask, cheap compared to what exactly? I mean, they're using real locations and real sets for this thing, which requires good lighting and for everything to look just so. And real sets and locations is more than most multi-million dollar comic book movies have been doing these days. And those things are looking faker and faker with every passing year. So I think the show looks great because it looks real, and it is real. That's the thing. No pun intended. But the thing is, it looks really good. The cinematography is also splendid, and the acting is just, I almost don't have words for it. Everybody is bringing their A game, and there are so many things that the actors have to convey, which isn't always easy, mind you. Like Saul in particular. Saul's supposed to be steadily losing his mind throughout the series, but he's not in a way like he's going crazy Joker style or something. The Bible says he had a troubled mind, right? So he's losing control of the kingdom and also losing control of his own mind, and there are so many emotions he's got to convey when he's dealing with family, when he's dealing with his own psyche. And depending on which family member he's dealing with, it's going to be different. Just the burden of dealing with being the king and all the different political things he has to deal with while still trying to remain stable. And of course, the actor playing David, he really turns it in. And I've seen interviews with him. He's taken this role very, very seriously. And I know that there are those who say that he doesn't look like what David was described as in the Bible. I mean, how they know what David looked like, don't ask me. I'm pretty sure that giant nude statue that was made in the Renaissance wasn't quite accurate, but you know, all the same, he's turning in a stellar performance. Actually, a very strange thing I noticed regarding how he looks. There was there's this band. They're a heavy metal band. I think they're semi-Christian at least. They've done quite a few songs about Christian topics called Signum Regis. And a few years ago, they did a song called The Future King that's about David fighting Goliath. And it gets an animated music video. You can still find it on YouTube today. Crazy thing is, the way David is drawn in that music video looks exactly like how David looks in House of David. And that is one of the craziest coincidences I have ever seen. Anyway, the performances are top notch. The set design and the real locations look amazing. The music is more ambient than it is like full of bombast and leitmotifs and everything, but it gets the job done, so I won't knock it. And overall, yeah, the only thing I really noticed that I would say was a problem is that there is a pretty glaring plot hole in there. See, this isn't much of a spoiler, but in the very first episode, they foreshadow Goliath because there's this one Hebrew city that was attacked by the Philistines, and there's all kinds of evidence to suggest that at least one giant was present during the attack. You have huge spears and arrows piercing through buildings and embedded deep into the ground, too big for a normal human to have used. You have a giant bloody handprint up on the wall. Clearly, someone involved in this production watched Kong Skull Island. You have an eyewitness who says there were giants there. So, all the evidence suggests that the city was attacked by giants. But the Philistines don't actually contact Goliath until I think the third episode, second or third, and Goliath doesn't officially join them until the end of episode 6. So if the Goliath and his brothers weren't with the Philistines before, who were the giants that attacked the city? The only two explanations I can think of was that either the attack on the city was staged to look like giants attacked it, or maybe the Goliath scenes are flashbacks. Neither one of those theories is actually supported by what's in the show, mind you. It seems like everything's just playing out chronologically in the way that in real time, as close to real time as the show gets. So, yeah, bit of a plot hole there, but overall, the writing is still really solid, and a lot of it comes right from the book. Although there are some liberties taken, and perhaps I ought to talk about that for a little bit. Okay, so when you're adapting any story between mediums, it's understood that some liberties are going to be taken. It's difficult to translate anything directly from one source to another without changing something. There have certainly been people who have tried with certain works, but even then, you gotta fudge the details somehow, somewhere, in order for it to really work. Now, that's just the nature of the nature of storytelling and the nature of adaptation. So I say the question is not whether or not changes are going to happen. The question should be, do the changes enhance the story in this new medium, or do they detract from it overall? For example, a huge liberty was taken in the animated feature-length version of the Lorax, where we actually see the Onceler. In the original book, we only ever see his arms and very briefly in some shots his eyes, but we never actually see what he looks like. We don't see what any of the Oncelers look like. And that's a very deliberate choice. There's a whole slew of reasons to unpack, but one of the reasons is that, you know, when most of the time when we're seeing the Onceler and we're only seeing his arms, he's also facing away from us, which means whenever the Lorax is talking to him, the Lorax is also facing the reader, and therefore the Lorax is talking to whoever is reading. And since the book is about conveying an environmentalist message, that is a very deliberate choice. It also means that because the Onceler has no actual face we can assign to him, that technically means the Onceler could be any one of us. In the animated movie, the Onceler is a very specific person. And that means we can, that like the original idea that the director said was that he wanted to show the Onceler and show that he was human, so because he thought that having the Onceler be a creature created some separation. In actuality, having him be a character with a visible face created the separation, because now we can just say, oh well, that guy was a problem but not me. So that was a liberty taken that detracts. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the original Jurassic Park. All kinds of liberties are taken to the point where you could almost call it an in-name only adaptation. All of a sudden in the movie, Dr. Grant has a problem with children. John Hammond is a much nicer guy. Certain people die who didn't die in the book and survive who didn't survive in the book. The whole subplot about dinosaurs getting off the island is completely dropped, as is the segment with the river raft. All sorts of different things. No Pteranodon Dome, another example. And yet, because the changes made are so good and the rest of the movie is so enjoyable, people pretty much instantly forgave it for not being a closer adaptation of the book. Then you have something in between, like Peter Jackson's adaptation of Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. Theatrical cut, lots of liberties taken. People did not like it. They thought it was a huge step down from the Fellowship of the Ring. Then we get the extended version, which puts a lot of stuff back in that provides better context for those changes. And everyone went, oh, well, why didn't you just leave that stuff in to begin with? That actually makes sense now why all those changes exist. So, like I said, it's not about whether or not liberties are taken. It's about if the liberties taken are good for the story or bad for the story. But of course, there's also the fact that we are talking about a story from a religious text, which many people around the world, myself included, also count as history. Which that's a little bit different. When you're taking liberties with history in the storytelling of it, you know, there's a little bit more reason for scrutiny there. I am on record saying that I'm one of the few people in the world who does not like the 2001, or is it 2002, whatever, the film adaptation of the Mothman prophecies. First, because for some reason it took the real events that happened and moved them from the 60s into the modern day, but also because when we got to the Silver Bridge collapse, the number of people who died in the disaster was decreased because, I kid you not, the producers thought the actual number was too sad, especially for an event that took place so close to Christmas. You can't make it up. So I think you gotta have a little more fealty to history and to religious texts when you're doing the adaptation. But at the same time, if you want to follow the 3-act structure, sometimes certain things have to be moved around or condensed or maybe even just skipped over because even though it really happened, it's not necessarily relevant to the event you're depicting. You gotta walk a very fine line there, of course. So with House of David, I thought they did an okay job. Like, obviously, you're going to have liberties taken. There's nothing in the text, I believe, that says witchcraft was ever implemented to try curing Saul's troubled mind. So that's a huge liberty taken. But at the same time, I kind of get why it's there. It's showing that so many things are being tried to help Saul, and that includes the use of black magic. And no matter what this witch tries to implement on him, even the most powerful things she's capable of, it's not working. The only thing that works, which is in the text, is when David comes along with his God-given talent as a poet and a musician, and he starts singing for Saul, and that's what helps. It is only that which is good and holy that works. And the series is showing us that there are forces of good and evil, but evil does not have a positive effect. Only good has a positive effect. So, a liberty taken, but I understand why it was taken. Or the connection that Goliath has to the Nephilim. Believe it or not, that stuff about the sons of God taking the daughters of men as wives and siring giants, that is in the Bible. And it's one of those passages where people have been debating for centuries what the heck it means. Theories run the gamut from, the Nephilim are fallen angels to the Nephilim are alien invaders. It's really that there's the context. It feels like something what might have been missing, but all the same, it is in there. There's nothing that necessarily connects the giants from that passage to the giant Goliath, but putting it in there does add a little more substance to Goliath as a villain. Plus, there's also a chance that Goliath's mother, in telling him and his brothers that this is their origin, it's possible she's lying. I mean, I don't know, but we don't necessarily have to believe that she's telling them the truth, even if we accept that something like those events might have still occurred. And of course, you have certain characters that were added, certain characters who were expanded to have their roles explored a bit more. Plenty of liberties taken, but overall, I do think it enhances the story. And the main point of it is to portray accurately the parts that we know are from the Bible. And when we get to those points, like that climactic confrontation, Even a couple of liberties might be taken there, but they still do a good job of conveying them. Now, having said all of that, there is one critique I heard in particular at one point that was leveled against both House of David and The Chosen that just hasn't sat well with me. The individual in question said that there's this postmodern view of modern society which says people cannot tell the difference between simulation and reality, which in this context means if they're looking at something that is an adaptation of, say, a historical event, a fictionalized account thereof, when they think of that fictionalized event, they're going to think of the adaptation, the simulated version of it first. And therefore, I guess that means they're going to think that the simulated version is the real thing. Now, the reason this doesn't sit well with me is because the argument reeks of intellectual bias. It basically sounds like whoever is saying it thinks that your average person does not have a functioning brain and that they are just these lumps of clay that can be molded however and cannot control their own perceptions of reality. Therefore, the enlightened one must come in and tell them how stupid they are. I don't think that way at all. I'm working on the assumption that you guys have functioning brains and that you can tell that when something is a show and when something is real, and that you understand alterations are part of the process of adaptation. I'm also going to make this wild assumption that this is a story taken from the Bible, and the Bible is one of the easiest books you can find. You can get a copy in pretty much any bookstore or any regular store that happens to carry books, but if you don't want to spend money on it, it's in the public domain. You could probably download the entire thing off of the internet for free. So, there, with that kind of accessibility, it's weird to think that people would just somehow not be able to tell the difference when they have access to the original. And I will admit, I am kind of stealing this argument from the documentary Fathead, which was made as a counter to Super Size Me, but I think it applies here as well. I'm not assuming that just because you're an average person, that means you have below average intelligence. I believe that as an average person, you know the difference between fiction and reality, and you can access the Bible or whatever the source material is if you want to. In fact, I would encourage it. You can do it right now, in fact, as soon as you're done watching this video. As an adaptation, though, I do think House of David works. At least this first season does. The way it ends does imply that the second season is going to maybe take a few more liberties, not necessarily in the events that happen, but more in when those events happen. But, I think they're still probably going to pull it out somehow. But that's still a little ways off. For now, we have the first season going, and the first season's really good. I would recommend watching it. And of course, I would recommend reading the source material as well. So that's where I stand on the matter. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.